Welcome to the Celebrating Women podcast. Mandee Montana and Ashley Fisher dig into conversation about women, their issues, their thoughts, their lives, and celebrate their gifts, their talents, their courage. It's the Celebrating Women podcast, presented by Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa in Tyler, Texas. Hey, it's Mandee, and you know I love to relax, right? I've shared the secret of where I go and some of my favorite treatments, and now I want to spotlight something else for you. The incredible staff at Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa in Tyler. This month, I want to tell you all about Alyssa. She made me feel totally at ease. I explored a deeper massage with her, and she was fantastic. She really found the knots that needed work, and she stuck with them until she helped them relax. It was intense, but it hurt so good, if you know what I mean. The next day, I felt so much more loose and relaxed. She really did great work in soothing out the tough areas that I carry tension in my shoulders. I also tried something new. I added on the cold stone facial massage at the end, and it was so refreshing. It's great for sinus relief and pressure. Definitely add it on this time of year. Schedule your next massage now by visiting Hand and Stone Massage and Facial Spa located in Cumberland Shopping Center, or book online at handandstonetyler.com. That's handandstonetyler.com.
Hey,
It's the Celebrating Women podcast back again.
yay. One of our favorite places to be.
It is. And we have been talking off the mic about various things over the last couple weeks. But one of the things that came up was I was recently at a convention in Las Vegas for my business, and we heard from this really interesting speaker. He walks out on the stage, and he's this little bald man, and he's wearing like a Hawaiian type shirt, and you're like, "Where is this going?" Yeah. And so I was like, I don't know if this is going to be good or bad or what, but I knew he was a photographer. Obviously, I'm interested in photography and photographers, so I thought, okay, we'll give this guy a chance. And it was one of the best keynote speeches I think I've ever seen. It was so lovely. His name is Dewitt Jones, and he is a photographer for National Geographic. And so if you've been listening to the podcast for the past few weeks, you'll know that Ashley talked about on one of the first episodes that was her dream when she was in high school. And so I'm sitting in the audience listening to this gentleman, and I'm thinking, I wish Ashley were here with me right now. It was such a cool experience. So I came home, I found a TED Talk that he had done, and I shared it with Ashley. And so you watched it today?
I did, and I loved every single minute of it. I really did. Like, I feel like if you feel like life sucks right now, or you just feel like the world is falling apart, you need to go watch this, because it just, I don't know, it's just such a needed perspective. So good, so positive,
so hopeful.
Yes. And almost, now it's bad. I almost hesitate to say positive, because there's that whole thing going around about toxic positivity, and it's not that. It's just a matter of, he was basically talking about perspective. And as a photographer, that's everything. What will make or break a shot is your perspective. And your perspective can take a very picturesque, wonderful moment from either being okay or being superb and amazing. It's perspective, and that's a lot of what he was talking about.
Yeah, he said that what he talked about at convention was so similar to that TED Talk. So I'll have to share the link with this podcast so that you can go watch it if you want to. But his assignment from the National Geographic, each time he went out to photograph something, he would be sent somewhere in particular to photograph maybe like trying to think of one of the examples, like a field of dandelions is one of the examples that you see that he shares in the TED presentation. But the idea behind it is always to celebrate what's right in the world. And I think, to your point, there can be so much coming at us that's negative, negative news and politics and just life in general. We've talked about this before. We're sort of wired as humans to survive, and so we see that first. But you can shift your perspective, and if you start to look through the lens of celebrating what's right in the world, you find more of it.
Yeah. And he even talked about, in situations that didn't go as planned, like that dandelion field. Like, he went but that day he didn't love the lighting, and so he thought, I'll come back another day and get a better shot. Well, by the time he came back, they were all dead. They were like the little puff balls or whatever. And he said, I was kind of discouraged, but then my charge came back to me. Hey, find what's right with the situation. Mm-hmm. And he showed, like, here's a shot I got, here's a shot that I got. And then when I really delved deeper into it, here's the shot that I got. And it was all of just, a matter of taking a situation that wasn't going as planned and that looked dead and finding a new perspective, asking that question. And this is a really powerful question too. What went right? What's going right? A couple of years ago, I went into a counselor's office because I needed some insight, because we had a pretty traumatizing experience with our son. He had fallen in the pool, and that had been, every parent's worst nightmare. And I was just having a hard time coping with it. He was fine. He was perfectly fine. Mama was not. And my counselor sat across from me, and she said, okay, you have told me everything that went wrong that day. Can you tell me what went right? And my brain kind of it was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? This was a horrific experience. But then I just took the challenge, and I started naming the things that went right. And she was keeping a score on her hand. Mm-hmm. And she said, okay, so we had this one really horrific thing happen that went wrong, but look at how many other things went right. Mm-hmm. And that shift in perspective, it was amazing, because it reframed for me. It pulled me out of blaming myself for feeling like a bad mom, and for realizing that there was protection over that situation, that Noah was okay, and that there was so much more that went right. And I think whenever we have, because we will, things that go wrong, it's so easy to focus on that. But this question is the thing that can kind of pull you up out of the water. Mm-hmm. Like, what's going right? Mm-hmm. I'm overdrawn in my bank, and I don't have any money, and bills are coming due, and I'm so stressed out. Okay, that's legit. What's going right? Mm-hmm. And getting back to kind of some of these conversations that we've had about just general gratitude and, I don't know, just that shift in perspective. It's so needed sometimes,
Yeah,
a lot of the time.
And I obviously, we love the word celebrate, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we can inject more into our lives too. It's part of why I loved the project that you started and how the podcast came about. But I love celebrating things, like even small things,
right?
And I feel like it adds more joy to my life. It adds more gratitude. And so I think that's part of what I really enjoyed about his talk too, is like this idea of celebration of these small moments, and even if it is just getting the right shot, changing perspective, celebrate it. Like you found something that's working. And the other thing I loved about what he talked about too was, there's not one right answer. Mm-hmm. There is a myriad of right answers, just like there's a myriad of great shots.
Right.
Like as a photographer, you get one incredible expression from somebody in a portrait session, keep going, because it is a right answer. It is a great shot, but you never know what they're going to do.
There's another right answer.
Right. What's going to happen in 30 seconds, or if you shift a different angle slightly. And life is like that, right? Mm-hmm. So I just really appreciated, he spoke for, I don't know, maybe 30, 45 minutes. The TED presentation's about 18 minutes. But he just told story after story of looking for that perspective. And then, and I can't remember if this is in the TED Talk, it might be, but also the depth. So like when he would sometimes go on to a portrait session, he would show up and he kind of had one expectation of how it was going to go. Mm-hmm. And it was a good expectation. But when he got into conversation with people, he would often find that there were layers and layers within that were unexpected. He photographed, I believe it was a Scottish gentleman, I hope I'm getting this right, for a Scotch advertising. It went on to win all these awards. But what was even more powerful from that was the images were wonderful and they were used in advertising and won awards. But this man's family that had moved all around the world, saw him in the ad and journeyed home to see him.
Oh.
And he had this framed image of it. And he had each person that came to visit him as a result of the ad write their name and the date on the back.
Wow.
And he had like 30. Well, then it became a family reunion.
Yeah.
And it was the first time this particular clan had been together in like hundreds of years.
Oh,
I know I've got chills talking about it. But it's like, when you do celebrate something, even if it's small or may seem small in the moment, you don't know what that ripple effect is going to be.
Here's the thing. I'll take that a little bit further. We're talking about celebrating something, but what if we celebrate someone in our life that I don't know, sometimes I feel like we don't mean to, but we have this tendency as humans to classify things and classify people. And I loved how he talked about, the more that I went about, knowing and not denying that there's hard things in life and that the world is on fire, but the more that I went about these different places looking for what to celebrate and who to celebrate, what good to celebrate, the more I saw it, and I saw it in people. And whereas I think it's maybe, I think we could all find something beautiful in a thing or in a place. It's harder as humans to find it in each other sometimes. And if I feel like, though, if we go with that, just that mindset of in my day, everyone that I come in contact with, even the ones that I have maybe some prejudice against or I have some presupposition about that interaction, if I go in clean slate, what is celebratory about this person? It will change things, and it will change the dynamic of a room, of a relationship, of possibly even the trajectory of things, if you just go about it from that perspective.
Yeah, and it can be as simple as a compliment, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's something that I've worked on just for myself. It makes me feel better, and not to make it selfish. I mean, I enjoy complimenting people because I feel good when I do it.
Yeah.
But I also really love the reaction because people don't get complimented very often.
Nope.
And sometimes they don't even know how to receive it because it happens so rarely, right?
Yeah.
But just a simple compliment of like, Ashley, I really like your glasses. I don't know if I've seen you wear those before, but I've been looking at you all day and I'm like, have I seen those before on her? They're really pretty. Like,
thanks.
but they are, and they fit you. They fit your personality and they really make you look beautiful. Something as simple as that, which is just an honest reaction to how I see you today.
Yeah. See, and I could, it doesn't necessitate reciprocity, but it usually will create this like thing because, and I'm realizing, I've been thinking all day, you're beautiful. You don't have any makeup on and you're so beautiful.
Well, thank you. It's funny how we don't feel that way, right? But
no,
thank you.
But there's just people, and I don't know, maybe this is just my photography heart. People really are beautiful. I have a hard time. I don't call anybody ugly.
Yeah.
Because and of course I'm talking about like externally, there's really and truly, if you look hard enough at any human being, there is no ugly. There is unique, and there is just really cool, really beautiful, really different, really whatever. Now, there are some really ugly people on the inside, which, that's that. But people are just so stinking beautiful. No matter what they believe, no matter how they think that might be different than you, there is something to celebrate and love. And I think that when we live in a world that is so negative, if you come at it from a perspective of, I'm surrounded by all of these people who are so different and unique, and that's a beautiful thing. Now, what am I going to do? This is an opportunity for me, when I'm navigating my day and I'm hopping in the gas station real quick to go grab a stick of gum or, can you maybe bring some life into that moment, and just say, hey, how are you today? And mean it, know? And I don't know. I just really loved that. It's a very simple charge, but find what's right with the world. Because maybe there's even more right than there is wrong. It's just a matter of focus. I don't know.
Have you seen, I feel like you might have you seen Richard Avedon's Portraits Into the West? I think that's what it's called. It's something the West, but I think it's Into the West.
I don't know. I'd have to see.
They're at they were, I think they're still there, at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, which is, if you didn't know, was the first photography museum in the country.
Really? I did not know that.
In Fort Worth, Texas. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's a really beautiful place. So if you ever have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. But Richard Avedon was a famous fashion photographer. So he made his name photographing, for the pages of Vogue, celebrities, models. Well, he went out into the West, the western part of the United States, where blue collar workers are plentiful, and he photographed them in the way that he would photograph models.
Cool.
So they're these massive black and white portraits that are almost life size. And oftentimes they're set against a white background, but it's these really rugged, interesting.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about how people are interesting to look at and how they're beautiful, but can be very different, and how you can find beauty in something that maybe is unusual or not the first place you would look. That was what came to mind, was this portrait series.
Yeah.
And it's stunning. It is dramatic and humbling, and you see courage and you see hardship and you see softness even in the ruggedness of the lines of some of these characters. It's just a really, really lovely series. I highly recommend going up there to check it out.
I think, I don't know. I feel like we have a special opportunity every day as we encounter people to see something new, see something beautiful if we are looking hard enough. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of ugly, again, around, just ugly things that happen. But I don't know. I mean, it would be very hard to have a bad attitude for too long if you are following that charge. Find what's right with the world. And especially if you're going through a hard time. At first, I feel like that question could almost make you mad. What do you mean? What's right with this? Nothing's right with this. Sit with that for just a minute and just piece it out. What's going right? Even if it's chilly out today and my heater works, or...
and it is chilly out today, but the sun is shining and it's gorgeous outside.
Beautiful. The weather this weekend was amazing. There is, one of my favorite Bible verses is what is it? I may be mixing up two verses, but a bruised reed he won't break, or a bruised reed he won't crush, something like that. Sometimes we feel crushed. Sometimes we feel like the things going on in life are just really crushing us. But we have that promise that no, we're not going to be overtaken. But sometimes it is on us to have to what's going right. And that's going to be the stuff that helps us not feel overtaken completely.
And it's if you seek, you will find. So what are you seeking?
Yeah.
That's going to determine what you find.
Yes.
So if you're seeking what's right, that's what you're going to find.
Yeah.
Truly.
It is true.
And I think, for myself personally, where I fall short of this often that I need to work on is within my own home, right? So I think oftentimes the people that we're closest to, we take the most for granted.
Yeah.
It's with my husband. He is an amazing person, but sometimes, and I don't know if you can relate to this at all, I start looking for what's wrong in a frustrating moment. And it's not fair to either of us or our marriage for me to be looking for that when I'm just simply frustrated in a situation. I can start looking for what is right.
Yes.
In that situation.
And it will, if you sit back and kind of observe, yourself. It changes your body chemistry. It changes, it just changes the thing. Because it's super easy, especially with a spouse. I feel like, Bradley and I have known each other for half of our lives. We've grown up together. And there are days when, we're getting on each other's nerves. And there are times when I can get, if I'm tired and I'm just, whatever, I can start nitpicking in my head. But it's interesting, the things that get me out of that space are taking a minute to focus on all the good and there's so much more right than there is wrong. And then you realize it puts that wrong, and I'm using air quotes, in perspective, and it's very minute in comparison to all of the things that are wonderful,
Right.
And I don't want that to sound like it's diminishing real pain and real, talking about a momentary, frustration is a lot different than massive grief or massive, whatever.
Or abuse.
Yeah. I think that it's necessary, with grief, with abuse, to acknowledge those things and to process those things. Because if, I've heard a podcaster that I really love, Tim Ross, he'll say, you cannot properly leave that which you do not properly grieve. So I am much more, in this point in my life, very much an advocate for processing your grief and processing abuse and processing those things. I think this can be something that when you feel overwhelmed by all of that, asking this question and letting it kind of shift you into the world is not falling in around you, it's kind of I don't know, it's just a very powerful perspective, that I think can translate from the tiniest inconveniences to the bigger, woes of life,
So I'm curious about this concept because I've obviously dealt with all kinds of people leaving, grief. This is pretty raw and real, but one of my core wounds is abandonment. And we won't go into the details of why that is because I'm not ready to share it. But it's a core wound. And so even in small ways, if somebody doesn't show up for me, it can sort of trigger that wound within. And so I have to really process it and dig and think through, this person is not showing up for me. It's not about me, right? I have to process it and I have to think through okay, they've got their life going on. There's bound to be something. They're not doing this to hurt me. They're not doing this to abandon me.
Right.
That's not the situation. So I know that for myself. Obviously, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I have been to therapy. I have friends that are psychologists. So I enjoy talking about these things, but I'm curious in what you've taken in from, listening and learning. What does that process look like where you're talking about, did Tim go into it where he talks about in order to leave, you need to grieve? Did he talk about that process? Is it therapy? Is it prayer? Is it journaling?
Yeah, I think it's all the things, the first time that he's brought this up a couple of times in his podcast, the first time he brought it up, he talked about, just giving yourself permission to feel the weight of the grief, be it somebody who's passed away or just leaving a job, leaving a community of people that you were really connected with, or, just giving yourself permission to grieve,
to hurt,
to feel it,
and not just try to brush it off.
Brushing it off, and we're all, some of us, I'm great at stuffing it down and moving on.
I can relate to that.
But it does me no favors.
Right.
It does us no favors. And I'm realizing what that does is that it builds in you a tolerance for a pain that you were never intended to go through. And it will keep you in situations that are unhealthy a lot longer than you should be, because you start letting down your guard in a way, and you start letting things and people and situations run over your boundaries. And then you stay when you should get up and go. And when you do have a season where you're leaving something or something has left you, someone has left you, it's okay and it's necessary. Not only is it okay, it's necessary to take the time to grieve the loss, because it's a real thing and it meant something, you know. Because if you don't grieve it, it's never going to leave you. But if you grieve it, you can place it and you can move on in health.
What do you think that looks, what does grief look like though? Like that's something that I struggle with because again, like stuffing it down. Oh yeah. Champion stuffer.
Yeah.
With various things throughout life, right? Some really big things, some much smaller things. But what do you think that looks like? Do you think it looks like crying it out?
For sure. I think crying it out. I think getting mad. I think being all of it. And I think too, looking at what you thought something was going to be and reconciling with what it is or what it was, and grieving that it wasn't what you thought, you know, or it wasn't what you thought it was going to be or what it could have been, or didn't live up to its potential, or, you know, just grieving what happened, but then sometimes grieving what didn't happen, being sad about it, being upset about it, being pissed about it.
Yeah.
You know, asking questions and being mad. It's okay. You know, like it's okay. So many people feel like you can't get mad and show your emotions, you know, especially like in the church with God. Baby, it's okay. It is okay. It is okay. You know? Yeah. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be wrecked. It's okay to be confused. But to, you know, again, give yourself permission to let all of that roll over you, you know, because if you don't, again, if you don't grieve it, you're just going to keep carrying it around. And then that turns into bitterness, I think. That's where bitterness, I think, comes from.
And then it really is hard to celebrate what's going right. So it's like, I feel like what I hear you saying is we need to grieve it, to leave it, then give ourselves permission to start celebrating what goes right.
Yep. And that does not mean, because if you're like me, I remember like at big points in my life, like when I got married or when I had my first baby, there was something in me that felt like, okay, I'm 3 months in, I should be used to this by now. Like I should be good.
Yeah.
We put this like time limit on ourselves. And when I say grieve it, I mean, if you need to grieve for 6 to 8 months, that doesn't mean that you're like, now listen, don't like grieve in a healthy way, as like some days you're like doing great and then the next day some new aspect of it hits you. Let it hit, you know, and you may like feel like, all right, I'm good, and then like a year later some new facet of it kind of hits you in a different way. Feel it, let it go and process it, and then move on, you know. But there's not this pressure of like, oh, that happened to you last week, well, you should be over it now. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, yes. Yes. I'm thinking of some moments that I've experienced in the recent past where I'm like, there were some expectations surrounding me from others, well-intentioned,
right,
for me to just move on.
Yep.
And I wasn't ready to move on.
Yep.
You know? And it's like you said, I feel like because I stuffed it down and I didn't necessarily grieve it because I was kind of being encouraged to just like move on. I think I carried it with me a lot longer than necessary. And you will. And that's ultimately what will happen is it'll stay with you a lot longer. Whereas if you just allow yourself to have all the hard emotions, it's not going to be the weight that it would be if you didn't do that. Right. You know? Kind of a heavy topic, but so much good in it, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where healing comes from.
Yeah. That's not really where I figured we would go, but I think it's just kind of, you know, there's things in my life right now that I'm grieving, you know, that didn't turn out the way I thought they would. And, but I'll tell you this, the act of allowing myself to grieve it, to think about it, to get mad, to be sad, has enabled me to see how good it is. I know that sounds so weird. But rather than like putting myself in this like emotional limbo of just being stuck, since I've really just allowed myself to kind of process everything, I'm seeing with a lot more clarity that what I left, I needed to leave. And what's ahead is a whole lot better.
Yeah, you have an appreciation for what you experienced, but also a greater appreciation for what's to come.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Thanks, friend.
You're welcome.
Celebrate what's right with the world, friends.
There's so much to celebrate, truly. But yeah, if you're, like you said, I think it's important to acknowledge that if you are going through something, we're not saying to just layer positivity over it. Experience it. And then when you're ready and you are beginning to see with more clarity, then start looking for what's right, because there's more going on that's right than sometimes is easy for us to see in frustrating moments. I know this week for me is a busy week, and I thought it was going to go a certain way, and last night found out it's shifting. And so, the first reaction was like, oh, okay, this is a gift of time.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity for me to do. I had this massive emotional shift in like a short amount of time, where it was like I had planned and I was prepared to do this one thing, and then it got canceled. And my initial reaction was like, oh man, well, I've put all this work into that. But man, within just a few seconds of shifting my perspective, I was like, oh, but that's going to open up all this time to allow me to get all these other things done that I was going to have to wait for. And so, yeah, it's just amazing that if you can catch yourself in those moments, feel it, deal with it. I mean, this was a minor thing for me. It wasn't a major grief situation. It was just a work task, essentially.
But still,
that was a cancellation. But, I was expectantly looking forward to it. But I can look forward to it in 2 weeks when it resumes, when it gets rescheduled. So it's like,
well, and I'll tell you
what
you did there too is that you're building muscle, because it was a smaller thing, but
Good
then
point.
when the bigger things happen, you're going to have that muscle built up, and so it's going to be a little bit easier to allow for that, that process of, all right, bigger thing here, but I'm going to allow myself to grieve. I'm going to allow myself to feel all the things. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to,
really celebrate what's right with the world.
Yeah.
Have a big celebration over something that's much bigger.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Yep. So good job.
Thanks, friend. Well, this has been an absolute joy. I'll definitely include the link for the TED Talk in case anyone's wanting to check out Dewitt Jones.
Yeah.
But if you'll send me the link to Tim Ross,
Yes.
either to that episode or just to the show in general, we can include that as well, because, one of the things that we love about being in conversation with each other and when we have guests is just the opportunity to share. Like it's the genesis of where this came from, was we were having these wonderful conversations and thought, man, would other people benefit from this in some way? Like how can we share more? And so to that point, we not only want to share with you, but we'd love for you to share with us.
Yes.
So there are various ways you can do that. You can find us on social media, but also, if you're listening and these things are resonating with you, we'd love to hear your voice. Use voice memos on your phone or whatever app that looks like, and shoot it to us in an email to celebratingwomenpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to start including our listeners into the conversation as Ashley and I get to visit with each other, and even have you guys bring up topics, because there may be something that you want to hear that we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
So that, or if you want to share the story of a woman that that's impacted your life or empowered you in some way, we would certainly love to hear those as well.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
Me too. Thanks, friend.
Thanks.
The Celebrating Women podcast wants to hear from you. Find us on social media at facebook.com/Celebrating Women Podcast, or on Instagram, search Celebrating Women Podcast. You can also email us a voice message to celebratingwomenpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear your story or the story of an incredible woman you know. Send it to celebratingwomenpodcast @gmail.com. The Celebrating Women podcast is created and hosted by Mandee Montana and Ashley Fisher. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to the Celebrating Women podcast.